Hello, this is Johnson, and today I'm just going to show you a simple web app to just get the feel of CRUD. So what we're going to do is pretty much have a table that we'll be able to add in, load in, and update, and pretty much just delete a user. So let's just get started with it. So I got VS Code here. Right off the bat, I'm just going to create a new file, index.html. And let's load in the boilerplate, so HTML5, and let's just give it a title of basic CRUD. Alright, so the first thing that I want to do is pretty much just be able to see like what we are creating. I want to be able to have the table and the different buttons to be able to add in users and delete and update and so on. Okay, so for this application, we're just going to pretty much use Bootstrap. This is to make it easier. We don't have to create any more styling. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up Chrome here. Here we go. And let's just go to Bootstrap. I think it was Get Bootstrap. Yeah. Okay, so and let's just go to Getting Started, Introduction. Okay, so once you get to this page here, you'll see that we have this CSS CDN, right? So we can just copy that so that we don't have to download it, and then we just put it right at the bottom of the title. Okay, so the next part here is let's just create the table for now. Okay, so for our table, what I want to do is I want to put it inside a container. So I'll put just container, and maybe just give it a padding of like 5. And now for the table, let's just write table. Give it a class of table and table bordered. And maybe we can add an ID as well, like table. Okay, so let's just create as well the headings, and then we'll try to check what we have on our browser. So let's just add thead here, and tr for rows, th for headings. So the first one would be ID, and the other ones, well, it's just going to be first name, last name, and email. And I'll also add another one called actions, which this is pretty much going to be like for the update and delete area. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run this file in a server. So I have this live server here. So if you don't have it, and if you're using VS Code, you go to your extensions and then just search for live server, and it should pop up right here by Ritwick Day. So you can go ahead and download that, and once you loaded that in, this will show here. And once I click that, as you can see, it's now running on port 5500. Okay, so yeah, as you can see, we already have our headings loaded in here. So the next part that I want to do is just create a very simple dummy data, just to be able to see what we have. Okay, so right at the bottom here, let's just add tbody, and I'm also going to give it an ID for now. So let's just say table body. Now the next part is just adding a row and pretty much just the names. Like for example, I'm just going to put my name here, Jansen, and this one is Bailio. My email, well, I'm not going to put my real email here for now. And lastly, okay, for the actions, let's just leave it blank for now, but I want to see what it looks like. Okay, so you can see, oops, I guess we have an error. Let's see here. td. Oh, sorry, my bad. I actually forgot to put the ID first, so let's just put 1 for now. Okay, let's go back to this, and okay, this is looking pretty good. Now what we want to do is add in two buttons in our actions column here. We want to put the update and delete. So for that, let's just let's go to get Bootstrap here, and let's see some examples. So I'm just going to search here, buttons, and as you can see, here are some examples of buttons, which I'm just going to type it down since I already know about it. So here, let's indent that and just add another button. So for buttons, we can just write button if you're using VS Code, button, and then add a class button, and we want to use button warning for this one. So I'm just going to put update, and then I'll put this character here so that we can separate the other buttons. So again, just add button, but this time I'm going to add danger. So this is for delete. Okay, let's check it out. And there we go, we have these two buttons. So one thing that I would like to add here is in the header of the actions, I would like to use like a class here and add just width of 25%. So this class will give a width for this header with a value of 25%. Okay, so I don't think I don't think there's much change here, but I believe that if I add here as well, maybe 25, maybe it's already in 25%. You know what, I'm just going to leave it like this for now. Okay, all right, so what else do we need? Okay, the other one is the button for adding a new user. So what I want to do is I want to add it up here above our table. So what I'm going to do is simply add it here. I'm going to create a new button. So button, class of button, and what do we want to use? Maybe just primary, and let's add a margin bottom of 4. This way it can be separated from the table. Okay, so I'm just going to put the inner HTML value here of add user, and let's see. All right, here we go. Okay, so now we have the 3 buttons, and this is our table. Now this is of course just a dummy data, but what I want to do for now is create a form where we are able to add in users. Okay, so this way I want to use, in this particular way, I want to use modals or modals. So let's go to our Bootstrap documentation here and just look for modal. Okay, so there are a bunch of examples here. You can use it via JavaScript and stuff, but let's just go to the basics, and you can see that we can actually do some live demo here. So clicking on that will trigger the modal. Oh, sorry about that. Okay, so let's copy an example here instead of like trying to copy everything. So well, I guess I can copy the modal, but for the buttons, okay, so if you don't know, I'll just try to explain this to you, this part. So this button right here will actually trigger the modal. So as of the moment, the modal is hidden, but when we click on the button, it's going to show up. So let me just copy this button for now, just to show you what the difference is. Okay, so we have our button right here, and what we want is we want our button to trigger the modal when we click on it. So I'm just going to copy and paste this right over here, and I want you to see the difference between our 2 buttons. So the difference is that we have these 2 attributes that are actually important for modals. So as you can see, we have this database toggle and database target. So what's important here is this one, the database target. So we're saying that which model are we targeting, and we're saying, okay, we want to target the one that has the, look at this, a pound sign or a hashtag. This means that it's a selector for an ID. So this is the static backdrop, which is pretty much right here. We can see in the modal example, the ID is static backdrop. Okay, so I'll try to explain this later on to make it clearer, but for now what I want to do is pretty much just copy this, paste it in, and then I'll want to change this to user modal. Oops, modal. Alright, let me just delete this now. Okay, so now what we want to do is we want to copy this modal. So I specifically chose this static backdrop because this will actually make the backdrop static. So what that means is that when I'll give you an example, I think this best explains it. So let's have this example, a normal demo of a model. So if I click on it, right? So I can actually click on anywhere here, and the modal will close. But here, if I click on anywhere, it's not going to close. It's persistent. Okay, so that's what I want. I want to be able to close this modal only when I click on close. Okay, so I'm just going to copy this, right? And then I'm going to put it, let's just put it below our container. Let's give it a class maybe of, actually, you know what? We can just paste it in right away. Okay. So we have this modal right here. There are a few changes that I want to make. First of all, it's the most important here is the ID. So we want to make sure that it is matching our database target, because this is to say that, okay, when we click on this button, we are targeting a model, and with the ID of, it's ID because of the pound sign right here, user model. Okay, so we have the static backdrop. Let's just change that to user model to match this one. Okay, and right off the bat, I believe that if with that simple change, if I now click on add user, oh, it's not going to work. Okay, so the reason for this is because we actually need to put in JavaScript as well. What do I mean by that? Well, remember where we only put CSS here for Bootstrap CSS? We also need to put in JavaScript. So let's just go back to our introduction page here. And here we go. So as you can see, we have also our JavaScript CDN. You can use the bundle or you can use a separate, but I just like to use the bundle to save us the trouble. And let's just put it down here before our body. Okay, so I believe now it can work. So let's just click on that. All right, add user. So as you can see, we have this very simple modal, and it's persistent, which is what we want. We don't want it to close unless we click on close or the X. Okay, so let's make a few changes for our modal now. First of all, let's just change the title. I don't want it to be modal title. I want it to be save user. And then I don't want this button, the X, to close it. I want only the close button here. And I also want to change this to cancel and this one to save. And let's change our class for the save here to success. Let's see. Meh. Success isn't really that good. It doesn't match. Let's just stick to primary. Okay, that's good. Alright, so the next part here is the body. This is what we want. So what we want to do now is pretty much just create the form to be able to add in users. Okay, so to do this, well, what you can do is you can go to your Bootstrap documentation here and go to your forms if you want. But I pretty much already know about this a decent amount, so you can just write it down. So in this way, it's kind of unconventional, I guess. I don't know if this is unconventional, but I'm not going to use the default on submit for the form. Instead, I'm just going to use on clicks. Okay, so just follow along and I'll try to explain this as we go on. So what I want to do now is just add in a form element, and I'm just going to add in the class form as well. We don't need actions, and yeah, that's pretty much it. So now what I want to do is add in the fields. So for adding the fields with Bootstrap, you gotta use form groups. So I'm just going to create a form group. So this is going to be in a div, and let's just add in a margin bottom as well. Margin bottom, oops, maybe just 2. Okay, so within this, I'm going to add in a label for first name, and the input is going to be the default text with the ID of first name as well. Okay, I don't know why they don't put the self-closing tag, but anyway, okay. So what I'm going to do is pretty much just copy and paste this. 1, 2, 3. So one for the last name. Let's just change this as well. Last name. Let's change this to email. And email. Oh, I guess I duplicated it too much. Let's just remove this. Okay. Let's see now what we get. There we go. Okay. I made a mistake. Guess I knew about it, huh? Let me just pause this for. Okay, so sorry about that, but one thing that I forgot about this input is that we actually need to put in a class from Bootstrap as well. So let me just do it like this. Let's see here. I guess I can just do it from here. Let's just put in class, and then the class should be form control. Okay, that's very important. Let's see here now. Okay, there we go. That's better. So again, just put in class the class form control on your input fields, and you're good to go. Now I don't think the margin bottom 2 does justice, so I'm just going to change that to 4 maybe. Alright, I think that's better. And also I want to add in like a padding of 5. Nah, it's too much. Maybe just padding from the sides of 4. Yeah, okay, I think that works. Okay. Yeah, so now we have our form here. So what we want to do is we want to be able to like save it for now. Just click save and then just pretty much add it right here, right away. Okay, but let's do that later on. What I want to focus on right now is being able to load in data using JavaScript. Okay, so now we're going to dive in JavaScript. We've pretty much finished our table and everything, every component here. So let's dive into JavaScript now. Okay, so for JavaScript, I'm just going to create a new file here called main.js. Okay, so one thing that I really like to do is sometimes I would like to make an alert or maybe a console log just to be able to see. So if we are connected to our JavaScript. So I'll just put an alert here saying that we are connected just to test it out. And below my Bootstrap here, I'm just going to add in that script. So let's just add in source main.js. So look, the moment that I saved it is actually refreshed and saying that we are connected. That means that our JavaScript is being read. Okay, that's good. So let me just remove this now. Okay, so how do we do this? How do we load in the data from JavaScript? So in this case, what I'm going to do is pretty much copy what I already have right here. Okay, so I'm just going to copy the data. So instead of just manually putting in the data, I'm going to create an object here. an array of objects called users, and each object will have ID and first name. Let's just call it Jensen. Last name Bailio, and what else? Oh wait, sorry, I forgot that I have a script, but let me just copy and paste this in to save some time. There we go. Really sorry about that. Okay, so this is my sample data. We just have 3 users here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a function that will handle loading this data. So I'm just going to call this function load users, and what we're going to do is we're going to try to loop through this and display it on our table. Okay, so let me just remove this for now. Well, you know what, I'll just let it stay here for a bit. Okay, so what do we want to do? What we want to do is be able to write into our table body content. So here in our table body, this format right here, which is we have a TR and a TD and stuff, the different elements or within every row. Okay, so this is something that I learned in college. So let's just do it like this. First of all, I'm just going to create a variable called table body content. So this is going to be a string that will hold the different rows for the table body. So now let's just loop through each user. So users.for each, and just store the object into the user variable. And for every loop of the user, I'm just going to what do you call this? Append. Okay, I'm just going to append into the table body content string the table rows that we're going to create right now. So I think you'll understand once I put it in here, but what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy the table row element, paste it in, and let's just fix the indentation for now. And there we go. Okay, so think about it like this. We're looping through the users 3 times because there are 3 users, right? So what's going to happen is that I am appending the string. Okay, this is why we're using the compound assignment operator plus equals. So for every loop, I'm adding in this elements, or this string right here, which is basically the tr element, 3 times. So this table content will have this string appended, and then what we want to do is after the loop, we just write it into our table body. So to do that, I'm just going to write a document.get element by ID, and then the ID is table body, and then let's write it into a string here. So const table body like this, and then now using the table body variable, we can use table body dot inner HTML. So this is going to write inside the HTML or inside the content of this table body element. Okay, so we're going to write inside the table content. Okay, so right off the bat, this is not yet finished, but I just want to show you what we have here, which is, oh wait, okay, so the reason why this is not yet here because we're not calling the function. I always forget that. So let's just call the function and let's see. Okay, so we have 3 same data, and the reason why they are 3 is because there are 3 objects. So you might think, okay, but what happened to the other one right here? It's supposed to exist, right? Well, the reason for this is because this table body.inner HTML, when we put an equal sign here, we're actually reassigning the whole value. So we are reassigning the entire thing here. So we're sort of like rewriting the entire inner HTML, if you will. Okay, so I hope you got that part. What we want to do next is pretty much, well, just first of all, let's just remove this. And what I want to do is I want to now, instead of this dummy data, let's write in as well the data from the user's objects. So I'm going to use ES6 here. I forgot what it's called, but I'm just going to put the $ squiggly brackets, and from here I can type in user.user ID, and that's referring to each user that has the field ID or underscore ID. Okay, so I'm pretty sure you already know about this, so I'm just going to use first name, and this one is user dot last name, and then user dot email. Okay, so yeah, I think this pretty much works. Let's see back. Let's go back to our. Okay, you can see that in our browser now it is loading in a bunch of different data that is coming from our object. So it's good. Okay, so for the next part, what we want to do next is pretty much just be able to add more users. Okay, so what we want to do first is just add some sort of like on click on our button. Okay, so where was it? Okay, here in our save button, what we want to do is when we click on save, we have to like fire an event or something. So to make this very simple, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add here an on click attribute, and for now let's just say, well, save user for now. Okay, so this is going to fire up or just call the function save user. So let's just create that function right now. Okay, so I'm just going to write it above our load users. So function save user. So what I also like to do is pretty much just put an alert just to make sure we are calling this. So calling save user. And we want to make sure that when I click on it, it's going to actually run that alert. So let's just click on it, save. Alright, calling save user. This is what we want. Now, what we want to do is be able to get each value from our fields. Okay, so when we type here, like say for example this value right here, when I save, we need to be able to get these values right here. So let's just do that right now in our main.js. Let's go back, remove this alert, and for this part, what we want to do is, alright, sorry about that. What we want to do for save user is be able to get the fields, right? So I'm just going to write it like this. So document that get element by ID, and this is going to be first name, right? And what I want to select is pretty much the value. Okay, so document that get element by ID, first name, and then the value. So this, I'm going to store this into a variable called first name, and I'm just going to copy paste this just to make it easier, and just replace this with last name, oops, and this one to email. Alright, so next is let's try to append this into our table. Okay, so for this part, what I want to do is just be able to create first the data. Okay, so let's just create a const append data is equals to, okay, the same as this one. Let's just copy this. Boom. Oops. Let's just copy that. Oop. And okay, So instead of user, what I'm going to do is I am going to create a new variable, okay, called user as well. And then it's going to have those three fields. So I'm just going to write first name, last name, and email. Okay. So one thing that you might have noticed is that we don't actually have like an ID here right now, right? So what I'm going to do is just add in an ID. And for now, this ID is going to be based from the users array. And I'm just going to write length plus 1. Okay. So that means that whatever the length is, just add 1 by it, and that's going to be the ID. This is only temporary. Okay, so one thing that I also want to add or point out here is that something that I don't like is that we are writing the same content from two different places, which is this one and this one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create another function called maybe write table row. No, I'm just going to say write user row. And we're going to get the user as our parameter, which is going to be the data, this one, like for example this one, or in this case this one. So it's going to return the same thing, which is pretty much this one. I'm just going to copy this, paste it in, fix indentation. Okay, so this way we don't have to write it like this, but rather we can just call the function write user row and just send in user. Okay, so same with this one, we don't have to write it like this anymore. We can just say write user row and then just send the user. Okay, so this is much cleaner. And if you actually wanted to make it even cleaner, because since this is just one line of code, you can just remove the squiggly brackets. Okay, so let's see if this still works. Oh, sorry about this. I actually renamed this for some reason. Please don't mind that. Rename this as well. Okay, let's refresh. As you can see, it's still working. Alright, now for the appending part, what we want to do is we already have our append data variable here, which consists of this string format of the table row. So now what we want to do is pretty much the same as this one. Okay, but if I'm just going to write it like this, alright, if I'm just going to, for example, just copy and paste it and then just change this to append data, okay, what's going to happen is that it's just going to rewrite the whole table, but it will only consist of the new data. It's going to rewrite everything, therefore it's going to delete what we already have. So what I want to do is, instead of just writing equals, let's just write plus equals. Okay, so what this means is that we are reassigning the inner HTML of the table body, but we are also getting the previous data, which is the, in this example, these three data right here. Is going to get these three data and then add in the new data as well. Okay, so I think this can be best explained if I just show it to you. So let's just add in a new user, okay, and then just save. As you can see, we now have a new row of data. If I'm just going to click save here, of course it's just going to keep on going. Okay, so now there's one thing that I want to update here, and it's that every time I add in a new data and click save, I want this modal to close. Okay, so there usually is a way to dismiss the modal like this. For example, in our index.html, what usually happens is that we can use this. I think there's an example here for the close. Okay, this one. the database dismiss modal. This is going to dismiss the modal or close it every time we click on that button. But I'm just going to use something else here. So instead of doing it like this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to close it via JavaScript. Okay, so what we can do to close it is write it like this. So let's just put it in our save user for now. Right here at the bottom, after we are able to add in a new user, I'm just going to do it like this. So what we want is something like we need to be able to get the Bootstrap model from Bootstrap, okay, and create an instance of that element. So what do I mean by that? Well, I'll try to explain as we go along so that you can better understand, but this is what I mean. So I'm just going to create first a constant model element, and what this does is just we're going to try to get the element with this ID, which is user model, I believe. So we're going to get the element, which is our model right here, this entire thing, the model. Let's just get that. We're going to try to get this element. So the user model is our ID, and then the next part is let's create a variable to hold the instance of that model. Okay, so I'm just going to create model and then say Bootstrap. Okay, so Bootstrap is coming from the CDN that we input right here. Okay, so Bootstrap dot what was that, model. Okay, and then get instance and then the model element. Okay, so now what we can do is we can pretty much just hide the model via the model variable. So just type model.hide, and what it's going to do is it's going to hide this model after we save. Okay, save. Okay, as you can see, the model has closed after we saved it. So something that I want to take note here is that we are pretty much going to use this somewhere else or everywhere maybe. So what I want to do is pretty much just remove this and create a function instead to close this model. So let's just say close model or close user model, and just paste it in there. And here, after we save the user, we can just call this function. Okay, let's just try it out again. Save, and as you can see, it still works. Okay, now there is a bug here. So when I add another user, as you can see, the fields are still filled in from the previous one. We don't want that. So every time we finish, or every time after we close the modal, or after we save a user, we want to clear out the fields here, and that's what we're going to do. So for now, let's just write it inside of our close user model. Okay, so how do we do this? Well, the same as before. So what we want to do is just like this one. Okay, let's just copy this for now just to make it easier. I want to select each field via their ID, and then select their value here, and then just add an equal. That means that I am reassigning their value to just an empty string. Okay, again, we are selecting the element or the input element by ID, which is like, for example, the first name. We're selecting the value, so this is coming from the value attribute, which I guess I didn't write here, and then I'm just reassigning its value to an empty string. Okay, so for this one, let's just change this to last name and then email as well. So let's test it out. Let's add again the user, and then when I click on add user, as you can see, the field is cleared. Okay, now the next part is for the update. So for the update, what we want to do is that when we click on the button update, it's going to open up the model again. So when I click on update, it should open up like this, but also it's supposed to fill up the fields that is based on the current data that we already have in our table. Okay, so like for example, if I click on update on ID number 2, it's supposed to fill in the fields of the first name, last name, and email. So let's do it one by one. First of all, I'm just going to try to make sure that when we click on the update button, it's also going to open our what do you call it? Our model. Yes. Okay, so again, like I mentioned, we just put data BS toggle, and then the value is modal, and then data BS target. Remember, our selector is a ID, so we have to put in the hashtag or the £, and user model. Okay, so for now, let's just test it out. Date, and as you can see, it's now opening the model. Simple as that. Now, the other part that I want to try to assess here is that this is going to be a bit hard to explain, but what we want is to be able to write what we have here in the first name, last name, email back into our fields. So there are a couple of ways to do this, but I'm just going to do it in my own way because I found this to be the easiest. Okay, so follow along, and this might be a little bit confusing, but I hope that you'll be able to get this. So for now, what I want to do is pretty much just create a new function in this for the update. Okay, so there are a couple of things here. First of all, in this update button, let's add in an on-click event or an on-click attribute, and it's going to call the fill form for update function. So we haven't created this yet. So this is so that every time I click on the update, is going to fire another event as well, which is going to call a function, and we can use that function to fill in the modal. Okay, so I'm just going to write that function now. So you know what, let's put it below this function. Function fill form for update, and for now let's just do an alert. Say ready for update. Sorry for the typo. Okay, if I click on update, as you can see, it says here ready for update. So that means that we are getting this data right here. So what I want to do is be able to pass in the data or user into this function so that we can make use of that to write it into our fields. Now, I'm just going to show it to you because just so that you can know that it's not working like this, but in case you had the idea, you might think that we can pass in the user like this and pretty much have a parameter here, says user, and then just console log user. But let me show you, I learned this the hard way. Let's inspect it. Hang on. Okay, so I hope you can see this. But when I click on the update, it's going to give me an unexpected identifier. Okay, so we can't exactly just pass in an object like this. Okay, it's going to give us an error. So I learned how, or at least I found a way to do this, which is what we want to do is pass it in as a string. Okay, so you might think, okay, let's just put some single quotes here. No, it's going to change that as well. It's just going to be an object. This is just a string. No, this is not correct. So the way I learned to do this, or found out what to do, is let's just pretty much encode the object. Okay, so this is what we can do, which is let's just create another function, another variable up before our return, and let's just say user update. Okay, so this is going to be the data. Now what we want is we want to first stringify our user. So let's just write json.stringify, then say user. The next part is we want to encode it. So JavaScript has this function that says encode URI component. Okay, let me just cut this out, and there we go. So what we can do is we can stringify the user and then encode it, and this encoded form or component is what we can pass into our function right here. So I'm just going to write user update. Okay, and yeah, I think this can work, but if not, I'll have to put some single quotes there, but let's see. Okay, so if I click on update, alright, as you can see, we get an unexpected token, so we have to put in single quotes. Okay, so we update, and there you go. So this is what we're getting right now. Now I know this is pretty much like a bunch of different syntaxes, but this is like the encoded component. So going back here, what we can do is we can actually decode it from here. So let's just how do we do it? So in this part, what we can do is we can decode it first and then write it to our field. So let's just, I'll give you an example first here just to console log it out. So let's just you know what, I'm just going to change this for now. So let's just say user payload, because I want to make use of the user variable. So user, and then let's say JSON. So first of all, when we did this, okay, just for an explanation, when we did this encoded form, you see that outside here we first it looks like we encoded it and then the stringify for the user, but now when we decode it, it needs to be in the opposite. Okay, so first we parse, and then we decode, or we put the decode URI component, sorry about that, component, and then we use the user payload. Okay, so it's the opposite now. The decode URI component is inside of the JSON parse. Okay, so let's just console log it out for now just to see what we're getting. Okay, update, and look, as you can see, we now have the objects which we can use to add back to our fields. Okay, so let's do that now. Sorry if this is a little messy. Okay, so back on our fields, what we can do is pretty much like this. Just write again the document.getElement by ID, first name, dot value, and for this one, we can just write in user dot first name. So let me just paste it and just replace this with last name. Oops. And for this one to be email. Alright, so let's just test it out, and as you can see, every time we click on update, it's now filling in the form. Okay, so if you have any questions, just tell me, or just leave it in the comments or something, I don't know. Okay, so we got this part right. We are able to fill in the fields, but now what we want to do is when I change this, okay, and click save, look, it's going to create a new user. So we need to be able to tell if this is an update or a save. Okay, so now let's try to make a condition to say, okay, we want to update or save something. Okay, so this is how I want to do it. I'm going to create a global function for now called just a let selected user ID. So this is to say, okay, which user ID is currently selected. For now, I'm just going to let it be null. Okay. Yeah, let's just leave it for null for now. Let's just leave it null. Okay. So going back into our field form update, okay, what we want to do is every time we select because this is going to be called every time we select an update, right? So every time we select something, let's change back the selected user ID to user._id. Okay, so that means that when we click on this update, this ID is going to be stored into this variable. Why would I want to do that? Well, it's because now I can pretty much just change this. So this is going to be a little bit confusing. I hope you can follow along. I'm going to change the save button here to instead call submit, right? So let's just say submit form. No, wait, let's just say submit button. Yeah, we can say submit form. Okay, so let's change it to submit form now, and I'm going to create a new function here called submit form. So I'm going to create a condition if selected user ID, alright, if selected user ID is not equal to null, or let's just say let's just put this exclamation point is just the same. So if it is not equal to null, then we want to update. Okay, so let's just say update, else we will call the save user function. Okay, I hope you understand this part, but let me just explain a little bit. So when the selected user ID is not null, and I'm just going to put this as well so that to make sure selected user ID is not equal to empty string, it's going to call the update function, which I'm just returning right now because we don't have that function yet. But when it is null or it is an empty string, we save the user. There's a difference because that means we didn't select any user to update. Okay, so I hope you understood that part. Now we're going to create a user or an update user function so that we can put it here and call it whenever we want to update, and the selected user ID is not null. Okay, so let's just add it below the save user. So let's call it function update user. Okay, no parameters. So what we want to do now is again get this values right here. So I'm just going to copy paste this, and then based on the selected row, we need to be able to replace the values based on this one. Oh, wait, not this one. This one, this example right here. Okay, so how are we going to be able to select each row? Well, we need to be able to add in a ID to be able to select each row. Okay, I hope you understood that part, but again, just to clarify, we're going to need to add a row ID so that we can select the row that we want to update. So for example, in this one, if I selected the Jansen, click on update, and then make some changes, we need to be able to select this entire row right here to be able to get this change and then put it inside of their columns. Okay, so let me just show it to you. I hope you can better understand it because I'm not good at explaining this. But going back into our user update function. Oh wait, before that, for every row that we add here in the right user row, okay, sorry if I'm confusing you, but I want to add in an ID class. Okay, so let's add in ID, let's say row dash, and then I'm going to put in the ID here to make it unique. Okay, so we have here row dash and then the ID. So that means in the update now, what we can do is we can select each row by their ID. Okay, so here, what I want to do is I'm going to do something like this. Say document.querySelector, and then this time we're going to say row dash plus the selected user ID. Okay, let me just explain what this does. So documented query selector is a little bit different from get element by ID, but it is a bit the same as well. So get element by ID means that we are getting the element via their ID. Alright, so that's pretty simple, self-explanatory. But the query selector, okay, the query selector means that we are selecting a query, and that can be anything. Alright, so the reason why I put here a hashtag is because I'm saying I want to select the query with the ID of row dash this selected user ID. If I put a dot here, that means I'm selecting a class, right? So I'm just going to return this to the hashtag. That means we are selecting the ID. So the selected user ID is the one that we selected when we click on the buttons, and I guess I'm having an error right now. I'm just going to focus that for later. You know what? Oh wait, it's supposed to be user. Sorry about that. Okay, so when I click on the update, remember that the selected user is going to be this ID. So that means that this row is a row dash selected user ID is the one that I selected to update. Okay, so I hope that wasn't confusing. Now, what do we want to do? We want to try to select not just the row for this ID, but also their nth child, the TD nth child. So what do we mean by that? Remember, okay, this is a table body, and each table body, if we look at the content here, it has this TR, right? And this is where the ID is coming from, row dash and then the user ID. Just like here, where is it? Just like here, where's the update? Alright, sorry about that. Just like here, row dash the selected ID, the user ID. Now here, look, we have this TD inside of our TR, right? These are called children of this element. So the nth child means that it's just saying which number in order are they as they're children of this TR. So for example, this nth child is the first child, second child, third child, fourth child, and so on. So I hope you understood that part, because what I'm going to do now is pretty simple, which is not only am I going to select the row by the selected ID, but let's just put a plus here. I am selecting the TD, which is, again, the element under the TR. And then we're saying, okay, the nth child, but the second. Okay, so I'm not selecting the first because the first is the ID, this one, TD nth child. This is the first one. What I want to select is the second, third, and fourth. Okay, so I'm just going to where is it? I'm just going to copy and paste this. But before that, what's going on here now is that I'm actually being able to select the element itself, not just the value, the element itself. So I think I can show you this better if I do a console log here. So first name field, let's just create a variable for this, and then let's change this to 3 and 4. That means the third and fourth child. And let's just change this to last name field, and the one below is the email field. Alright, so let me just console log this out so that you can see. First name field, and I'll just do it like this. Okay, so what do I want to do now? Of course, you're not going to be able to see this unless I change the submit form here to change to call the update user function. Okay, so now let me just delete this comment. Okay, so now if I click on update and just save. Oh wait, I guess we're not calling this right now. Update user, hang on. Okay, so I actually made a mistake. I'm very sorry about this. Just to try to debug this. But I had something wrong with my logic, which is right now what I have here is that if the selected user ID is null or undefined or something is false, it's going to say update user or call the update user function. But that's actually wrong. I'm really sorry about that. But what we need is, instead of calling the update user, let me try to explain why this is wrong. So the selected user ID is supposed to be not null when we update the user, because we selected a user to update. So it's not supposed to be null. Okay, so I just had it backwards. This is supposed to be save user. So we want to save a user when the selected user ID is null. That means this is not an update. We didn't select any user to update. So this is a new user that we're saving. And then for here, update user. Okay, I'm sorry. I hope you got that part, but really sorry if this was a bit confusing for you. Okay, so let's test it out one more time. If I click on update and save. Okay, this is what I meant. We're displaying in our, for now, we're just displaying in our update user function the first name field, last name field, and email field. We are able to select it via this query selector and their nth child. Okay, so the beauty of this is now that it's like the same as getting the document by element by ID. So what I want to do now is just pretty much first say first name field dot, and then just write inner HTML equal to first name, right? And this is pretty much the same. So I'm just going to change this to last name. Oops. And then this one to email. Alright, there we go. So with this change, I'm sure that when we update, it's going to actually update the field as well. So let's just use this example. I'm already done. Let's just put some S's, save, and then look, it is now updated. So one thing that we forgot to put, or I forgot to put, is close the user model. Right? Again, let's try it out. Put some S's, save. Okay. So one thing that I want to add here is that when we update, right, I don't want it to be save. I want to change this word to update. Okay. So it's very simple. Let's just do it like this for now. What I want to do is I want to add an ID for this save button. So let's just say ID submit button. And now, excuse me, every time we update, we want to change the inner HTML of that save button to say update. So I'm just going to write it in our fill form update. So that means every time we click on that modal, or we open that modal for an update, I want to change its inner HTML. So I'm just going to write document.get element by ID, and then the ID was submit button, and then let's say inner HTML. Now instead of saying save, it's going to say update. So let's test it out. Okay, so for now it's saying save. Okay, click on update. Look, it's saying update. Okay, now there is one thing that's there's going to be a bug here, which is that when I add another user, it's still going to say update. So let's make that very simple change here. I'm just going to copy this, and in our close modal, I can also write it back here, where every time we close, we change this back to save. And then we also want to change our selected user ID back to null. This is very important. That means that every time we close the modal, especially if it was from an update, we should revert this back to null, because if we don't and we try to create a new user, it's going to try to update it if this is not null. Okay, so I hope you understood that part. Okay, so let's try it out. Update says update, add user, still says update. Well, I guess I have a bug here. Oh, of course. So what's going to happen is that when we close it from here, cancel, right? It's just going to dismiss the modal but not change anything. Okay. So this is a very simple thing to do. What we want to do is, back in our HTML code here, we have this dismiss, right? What we can do is, instead of just dismissing it like this, we can make use of our function called close user modal. Was it? Okay, let me just double check. Close user modal. Yeah, that's right. Okay. So now, if I go ahead and cancel this, it's going to still close it. And as you can see, if you caught that, you can actually see that this is going to change right away to save before it even closes. So look, okay, if we were able to see that, but yeah, at least we know now that it is working. Okay, so we have our what do you call it? We have our update now working. Let's just double check right now. Update, yes. And then if we want to update again, okay. So this is something. All right, there is a bug here. So this is let me explain why this is happening. So what happens is that we are just replacing. Okay, this is something that I didn't actually foresee. So what's happening is that we are actually just changing the content here, but we didn't change the content in our update model. So I'm just going to change that for now. So what we want is to be able to get as well the the fifth child, and then its first child here. Okay. Okay, so I found the error, and I'm really sorry if this slipped past me, but let me try to explain what happens, and let's try to go through it. So right now, in this example, if I try to update the Johnson, right, and update that, as you can see, it is being updated. But when I click on update, it still has the previous data. And this is because if we go back to our code here, you can see that when we created this row, we already have the user update data here, right? Remember this encoded data? So this encoded data still has the previous data that has been encoded and passed on as a constant string here. So therefore, even though this one, the table data has already been updated, but in our function onClick, it didn't update the string that was passing in as a parameter. So that's the problem here. So what we need to do is we need to be able to rewrite the onClick value here as well. Okay. So luckily, this is not that hard to do. This can be done in 3 lines. So below our email field, going back to our update user function, I'm just going to add in another variable called update button field, and this is going to hold our button that for update. Okay, so let's just I'm just going to write sorry, I can't speak. I'm just going to write document.querySelector again, and this time it's going to be the same as row dash plus selected user ID plus the nth child. This is going to be the 5th one now, but also I want to include here the button nth child first one. Okay, so that means that in our 5th TD, or in our 5th table data element, which is the 1, 2, 3, 4 5. Okay, this one, the 5th one. We are also selecting the button nth child number 1. So this is the first one. Okay, so that's what we're doing here. And then the next part is we need to be able to update the on click, right? So before I do that, I'm going to create again the same way that I did before with in our user update here. Sorry. So here I'm just going to write again the const user update. Sorry, encode URI component. Okay, and then JSON.stringify. And in here, I'm just going to recreate the same data. Okay, so the same object. It's just going to be the same selected user ID, the first name, last name, and email. So now what's different about this is our first name, last name, and email is now from the new value. The ID will stay the same, but the first name, last name, and email will come from our input fields. So we have this user update. The last thing that we need to do now is we need to change the on-click value here. This one. So we need to change this, especially this one. Okay. So what we're going to do is, and you might be thinking, okay, just put the update button field and then just say on-click and then just change the field. Nope, this will not work. What we need to write here is we need to put set attribute and we'll say, okay, what attribute do we want to set? This for the on-click as the first parameter here. We're saying, okay, we want to change the on-click value. And for the second parameter, this is going to be what's going to be inside the on-click. So this is going to be same fill form for update. So this is the same function that we want to call, but this time we should now add the parameter as the new one. Okay, so I'm just appending this string right here, and then plus again this one. Okay, make sure this is complete. So just to make sure, let's double check. We have our closing double quotes, our closing parentheses, and then okay, I think this is good. So now let's test it out. Let's try to update the Johnson twice. Let's just write some S's, update. As you can see, it's updated here. Now if I want to click on update, as you can see, the S's are now back in. Okay, this is good. Let me just clarify this. Boop, boop, boop. Boom, update, and there we go. Okay, now let me just remove this user while I was debugging earlier. Where is that? Okay, just remove this. Don't need to worry about that. Okay, so I'm pretty sure that now we have everything we need for creating and updating. The last thing that we need is for deleting. So luckily for delete, it's very simple. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to go back to our right user row here, and here every time we click on this delete function, we are going to call an on-click event called delete user. And what do we want to put inside? We want to put inside the user ID, just the ID. Okay, oops, sorry, I can't type today. Alright, user ID. So let's just create this function now. I'm just going to put it below our update user. Function delete user. And it is passing in this user ID. So let's just test it out for now. You know what? Let's just do a console. Console.log the user to delete user ID. This is why I really love console logging. Okay, delete. Okay, you can see that the ID is 1. That's correct. Let's see 2 and 3. If we add in more, say for example save and click on delete, it's going to be 4. Alright, so what do we do now? So we have our user ID. We want to just be able to select the row via the ID and then just remove the element. So let me show you what I mean here. I'm just going to write here document.get element by ID, and then row dash, and remember this row is coming from when we created this one, okay? This one. So row dash and then the user ID is the ID for each TR or table row. Okay, so going back to our delete, here we go. Once we have this, I'm just going to first of all put it in another variable. So user element. Okay, and then simply just write user element dot remove. So this is just going to remove these the selected user element. Okay, so I'll give you an example. Delete, 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 and there we go. Delete, delete, delete. It's working now. Okay, so we have our delete, we have our update, we are complete with this CRUD. But now what we want to do is we want to be able to try to connect this to a backend. Okay, so I'm not going to go into full details with the backend right now, but in this example, what I want to show you is I have a server running on my local host port 3000, and it has the basic endpoints to be able to create a user. Okay, so I'm not going to discuss any more back-end stuff, but I am going to discuss about Axios. Okay, so in this application, we're going to use Axios to try to talk to the back-end. And if you don't know what Axios is, you can try to look at their documentation. So getting started with Axios, and we have this different examples here. Now, if we go to their page here in the introduction, you can see that you can use npm or bower or yarn to install Axios, but for me, I'm just going to use the cdn. So let me just copy this, and then now we need to put it in our HTML. I'm just going to put it above my Bootstrap. Okay. Now, let's try to do this one by one. First of all, we are going to use the load users. Okay, load users function. So instead of using the users as an array, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the backend, and fetch the users. So again, I'm not going to tell you how to build the backend, but I'm going to teach you, or I'm going to include in this tutorial how we are going to fetch from that backend. So I'm just going to create the same user, the same data users, and then here I'm going to say Axios dot get, and we'll say, okay, where do we want to get it from? We want to get it from our local host port 3000, and our endpoint, or the endpoint that I created for it, is users. So this is actually going to fetch what this API is going to return. Now, just to give you an example here, let me just copy this real quick and paste it in my browser here. Okay, look, as you can see, this endpoint actually returns an array of JSON data. No, wait, this is not JSON. Objects, sorry. So we can make use of that here. So one thing that I'm supposed to tell you is that Axios returns a promise. So that means we have to use either .then like this to get the user, but I'm just going to use async await for this one. So let me just change this to async, and then say await. Okay, so now we are waiting for Axios, and instead of saying users here where we're using the users from this array, we can simply remove that. Okay, and now this users is loading in from this endpoint. So if we go ahead and check back to our code here, okay, there's one thing that I forgot. Users Axios at get users async await. Oh, okay. Okay. Okay, one thing I forgot about Axios is that this Axios will actually return an object instead of the data right away. So let me just write it like this: response. Let's change it to response, and let's just console out the response for now. Okay, so when I load this in, as you can see, we have this object which is the response. So we have different responses, which is like the config, the headers, the request, the status. The status 200 means that it's okay. So what we're interested here is in the data array. So this data array is actually where our data is coming from. So as you can see, when I open this up, this is coming from the database. Okay, so this is what we want, the data. So going back here, this is what I'm going to do. So instead of writing it in a response, I'm just going to deconstruct the entire object, or not the entire object, but I'm just going to deconstruct the return value, which is an object. I want to make use of the data, but rename it to users. Okay, so I hope you understood how this works. Okay, and before I can even finish explaining, the data is already been loaded here. But what's happening is that when we fetch from the Axios, right, you saw that we are getting an object. I deconstructed that object and fetched or get only the data field and then renamed it to user. Remember that data is an array. That's why I'm able to use the for each here. All right. So the next part is being able to use the backend as well for the different operations. So let's start with the save user. Okay, so here in our save user, this is already okay. All right, we are already writing into our table. This is fine. But what we need to do is we need to be able to save this data into the backend. All right, so maybe here, just here, I'm going to write an await. All right, and let's say await axios.post. Okay, so for post now, it means that we are creating a new data. So same with the with our localhost port 3000 API users. Now this endpoint is for creating a new user. So the second parameter will be the data. So I'm just going to pass in the first name, last name, and email. No need to pass in the ID because it's going to generate it for us. Okay, so remember, axios.post is for creating. The first parameter is for the endpoint or the URL of our API. The second parameter is the payload, an object where we pass in the data that we want to save. Okay, so we're passing it in. Now usually we're going to need to have, like, for example, a what do you call it, like a validation. But for this, it's very simple. I just want to show you how Axios work. So the last thing that we need right now is an async for this one. And let's go back. Let's try to test it out. I'm just going to add Alphon Bernardo, and his email is alphon@sample.com. Save. Okay, so right now we're having an error here. Let's see. Oh, okay. So one thing that I forgot to put here is that users is no longer available for us, right? So what I want to do is I want to do the same thing as before. Get the data, change it to user. Okay, so now we're saying whatever this returns to, and this will return axios.post will return the object that you just created. Okay, so it's going to return the data. Let's rename or give an alias as the user, and now change this users to user.id. Okay, so I hope this is understandable, but what's going on here is that if I actually console log this user, this is going to be the user that we actually just created as an object. Okay, so yes, I think this is pretty much going to work. Oh wait, user. Oh, I guess I'm already using the user. Oh, okay. Because this is giving us an error because we have duplicate users now. What do we want to change this to? Let's just change it to maybe new user. You know what? Let's just stick to data. So data, let's change this back to data, and I'm sure this is working. Okay. I guess it's already been saved. So let's just give another example for it. Let's say Jaiton, Pagayonan, Jaiton at sample.com. Alright, if I save this, as you can see, Jaiton is now saved, and this is the data or the ID that's being generated in MongoDB. Okay, so now let's focus on the updates. For the update, it's also the same as create. Right, so this is going to be very simple. In our update function, as soon as I can find it. Alright, here we go. So this is the part where we first get the data, the new data that we input in our field. From here on in, let's try to write it into the database. Okay, so again, before I forget, let's just write an async on our function and then say await Axios. Okay, so here's the tricky part. So I don't know why this is, but based on my experience, the put doesn't always work. Alright, so what I'm going to do is instead say Axios and then create use the function, the general, and then just write an object within it. So this way, this usually just works just fine. So instead of just writing Axios.put, this is going to be Axios and then function, and then in this function, we're going to send in an object, and this object will have the method, which is put. Put means to update. We have our URL. So the same one, HTTP localhost API users. And for the data is going to be first name, last name, email. Okay, one thing that I almost missed here is that for the put in my endpoint or in my API, this put requires an ID. This requires an ID so that we will know which data are we trying to update. So the ID is supposed to be inside or within the URL as well. So right after the users here, I'm just going to add another backslash and add a plus and say the selected user ID. Okay, so remember, the selected user ID was already been initialized when we fill up the form, so it's not going to be null. So after updating this, it's just going to rewrite the data into the table, but it's going to save that in the database as well. So let's try it out. Update Joytons, update, and there we go. So now if I'm refreshing this, yes, as you can see, it's been saved in the database. Let's try it out again with Alphon as well. Update, and there you go. So if I refresh, it's still updated. Okay, I hope you got that part. Now, the last part is the delete. So this is going to be very, very easy. I'm just going to write an async here. And for the delete, it's a little bit the same with the the put, where you have to put in the URL the ID as well. Now, luckily, we don't have to write it like that. We can just say delete HTTP localhost 3000. I hope I didn't get that wrong. Close 3000 API users, and then just say the user ID, not the selected ID, the user ID. And then once that's deleted, it's just going to remove from the table and also in the database. So let's try to delete Jytons. Refresh, no more Jyton. Jaime, refresh, no more Alphon. Delete this, no more, and one remaining. Again, add user, Save, refresh, and it's still there. Well, I guess that's pretty much it. Hopefully you understood. I know this is a little bit confusing. It's my first time, but I hope you learned a lot here and got some few pointers. And of course, Ali, this is just for you. So if you have any questions, just reach out to me, please, and I'll try to make it clearer for you. Okay, so that's pretty much it. Thank you. Bye bye.